And welcome from me as well to the EU Presidency Forum. I must say it's pretty hard to take the stage after such a brilliant interview from Francesco and Cynthia, so I'll try to do my best. I'm Federica Di Stario. As Francesco said, I work with the Parliament magazine. I'm a reporter, and I'll be the moderator for this discussion on revitalizing the single market, Europe's most powerful engine for growth and competitiveness. I'm sure you know it by this point. So I was born in 1993, the same year that the single market was actually created here in Europe. It was one of Europe's most ambitious projects, creating the free movement of people, goods, services, and capital. For decades, nobody doubted that it was a big success, but then it has stalled, unfortunately. So today, we are at a pivotal moment, and there is growing consensus that Europe can no longer afford to be complacent. According to Mario Draghi's report, failing to deepen the single market right now would condemn the European economy to a slow agony. The European Central Bank has even estimated that barriers to trade within the EU have an effect comparable to imposing tariffs of around 100% on services and 65% on goods. It is, as we like to say in the city, a no-brainer that we have to deepen the single market. So the question is no longer whether we have to reform the single market, but rather how to deliver and how fast we can do it. So to discuss where we stand and how the Irish presidency can help advance the agenda to restore Europe's competitiveness, I'm delighted to introduce the panel that we have today. I would like to invite to the stage MEP Barry Cohen. He sits with the Renew Europe group, and he's also a member of the Agriculture Committee in the European Parliament. Many thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Very much, Erica. Yeah, thank you.
And then we have Emma Blaine. She's a member of the European Committee of the Region and also the former Lord Mayor of Dublin. Hi, Emma.
Hi, Frederica.
I would now like to invite Sophie Ellison-Morsing. She's the Vice President for Public Affairs and Stakeholders Relations at Coca-Cola Euro-Pacific Partners. Hi, Sophie. And last but not least, we have Jimmy McLaren. He's also a member of the European Committee of the Regions and a representative of Galway. Hi, Jimmy. Thank you for being with us. I must say it's quite exceptional for me to be in a panel with just one nationality, but I think we will see many of those during the next 6 months. So better to start early. So it's a big topic, the one that we are tackling right now, because it's really, we're talking about how to revitalize the economic growth in Europe, and we know that a lot of what we want to do, be it on defense, be it on AI, actually depends on it. So Barry, I'd like to start with you and go back to a topic that we like to mention a lot in this city, which is, of course, Draghi's report on competitiveness. So there was a recent report by the Institut Montaigne that found that the bloc has implemented about 30% of Draghi's recommendations so far, and they also estimated that they could reach up to 60% by the end of the year, which is more than people suspected, because there was a bit of negativity about how fast we can fulfill the recommendations. But now, beyond the numbers, where do you think that we stand in implementing what Draghi himself has described as the bare minimum, actually, to restore Europe's competitiveness?
Okay, well, thanks very much. Look, the theme of this mandate, and the mandate is 5 years rather than 6 months, which our presidency is to restore Europe's competitiveness. And you're quite right in that regard, and we've lost our way in a way, and I suppose it was crystallized by virtue of the war in Ukraine, crystallized by virtue of the issues associated with the US and their tariff system, and the way in which we respond. Like if you look back at where we've been successful in recent times, it's because of our unity. whether it's in relation to the banking crisis, whether it's in relation to Brexit, in relation to the response to the war in Ukraine, in relation to COVID, in relation to the vaccination programme that ensued, and in the way in which we responded to the issues associated with the threats from the US in relation to the tariff proposals. Europe is best when it's united. If you know, and with the US looking inwards and the likes of China becoming more assertive, it is imperative that we look at international trade, we look at input costs, and we find a way during the course of this mandate to respond to those issues. You've seen international trade agreements on behalf of the EU by Sefcovic and his team being completed much more timely, much more efficient in their delivery. The manner in which the translation and legalities associated with agreements come to a reality thereafter are much quicker than they were. Innovation, you know, you could look at the US, for example. They say they innovate and then they regulate. We were almost regulating before we innovate. The issue associated with energy costs, exposed cruelly as a result of the war in Ukraine, our over-dependency on Russian gas, exposed even further in relation to the Middle Eastern crisis. So the whole issue around permitting, around planning, around bringing sustainable energy products to the market is something that has to be addressed. So there's a realization and an understanding across Europe that we have to be in a position to be more competitive, not be as complacent as we had been. And I have a responsibility and a duty as an elected representative to those that give me the privilege of being here to be in a position to ensure that our companies across Europe have the wherewithal to be competitive, have the wherewithal to respond and be assisted in relation to input costs, which not only have an effect on business and industry and commerce, but also in relation to cost of living. And you know, it's essential that those issues are addressed. And you know, while our presidency is not necessarily a wish list for the country who assumes that role, it merely drives the legislation associated with delivering on those commitments. And that's our responsibility, to act as an honest broker to ensure that legislation that helps and assists in relation to competitiveness, that helps assist in relation to innovation, that helps and assists in relation to delivering international trade agreements, that our presidency is to the forefront of ensuring that the administration associated with delivering on those commitments and the legislation associated with is delivered quickly and efficiently.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. Yeah, it sounds like a big work in front of us. But Jimmy, I would like to go to you now on the other end of the panel. So you represented Galway, a region with a lot of SMEs, and obviously also agriculture and tourism, technology. But from a local perspective, can you tell me how you see where the single market works and where actually businesses, especially from your constituencies, still encounter a lot of unnecessary barriers?
So first of all, I'd say that coming from where I come from, we have to acknowledge, you know, the benefits that has been from the single market. Mm-hmm. And of course, everything is changing. And, you know, the big change, I suppose, that we didn't see coming was what's happening in the United States and the relationship between the United States and Europe. You know, we never expected that it would fragment to the extent that it has, and it would present the challenge that it does. So yes, Galway has benefited hugely from being part of, from the benefit of the single market. So I suppose we need to look at the bureaucracy around the single market. How can we, without damaging the security, you know, how can we reduce regulation here? A lot of people are getting frustrated that, you know, it's difficult in many aspects to do business, and we shouldn't have that situation. Clearly, if we're a single market, if we have unity of purpose, then we should be able to face that challenge and face it very timely. And I think we all recognise that the status quo no longer will suffice. Mm-hmm. And therefore, for the Irish presidency, and our focus is around values, competitiveness, and security. And I suppose is how you marry the competitiveness aspect of it with security. And I see the challenges there. I feel the Irish presidency is up for this, and it's one of the things that we obviously all want to see improved. We all want to see new measures there, and I'm very confident that during the next 6 months that we will see the Irish presidency bringing forward some measures to improve our situation.
Yeah, we will definitely discuss about also. You said it's not going to be a wish list of the country, Barry, but I want to see what's your wish list at the end for the Irish presidency. And Emma, to you, and a bit of a similar question, because also you have been the Lord Mayor of Dublin. So I guess this was a brilliant position to witness the Irish miracle, so to say, and how you benefited from the single market. To me, looks like Ireland has been one of the member states that has benefited the most from the integration brought by the single market. Can you tell us a little bit your experience as the former Lord Mayor of Dublin, and also how, like, the lessons that also can be replicated at the EU level?
I found it amusing that you told us that you were born the year the single market came into force. I was a little bit older. I wasn't quite a teenager. But like you, I don't really remember a time before that. Yeah. So in some ways, I have lived through all the benefits without knowing personally what it was like beforehand. But I do remember working in a part-time job when I was in university, when the switch over to the euro came, and the excitement around Dublin, but also the administration involved in the tills at the time, which was a normal student job at the time. But yes, like you say, Ireland has benefited enormously from the single market, and more specifically Dublin. As you know, and it's always said that the single market is the cornerstone of the EU, but also that SMEs are the backbone of the economy. And as local representatives like me and Jimmy, we're working at the coalface with those SMEs every day in Dublin, from the independent jeweller on Grafton Street to the huge multinational tech companies that are in the Docklands. Everybody is benefiting from it. And it has allowed our thriving, Dublin is a thriving economy. It's a wealthy city. It has its problems and its challenges like every capital city, but we do have a lot going for us, and that is mainly due to the single market and the ease that industries, I know Cynthia spoke to the aircraft leasing sector, which is a huge part of our economy, our tech sector, our banking sector, all of those are allowed to thrive because they're able to operate seamlessly across our borders. And that we're able to attract the workforce from across Europe. I mean, it is now not as cosmopolitan or multicultural as Brussels, but it is a city that has benefited not only economically but culturally and in every other way. And during my time as Lord Mayor, I visited every part of Dublin that I could, and like that, you could see the benefits from the corner shop, in Ballymun to the large restaurant chain in Rathmines. And, I think one of our biggest strengths as a country is that we love Europe. We always have, and I hope we continue to do so because it's done so much for us, and we now have to give back, I think. So, yeah.
It's good to hear that there's a country that loves Europe
we do.
So much without questioning it. Sophie, you're the Vice President for Public Affairs at Coca-Cola, obviously a multinational, very different environment from the local level, from the SMEs that that Jimmy and Emma just mentioned right now. Coming back to the questions about the Draghi's report and how far we have been in achieving some of the recommendations, what's your take from your point of view? Working for a multinational company, do you think there has been enough progress since Draghi sounded the alarm 2 years ago about the lack of penetration of the single market?
Thank you, and good morning, and thanks for inviting a non-Irish as well. Also being able to give perspectives from a company perspective. I mean, we're all different reflections. Coming back to your question, I do sincerely believe that the competitiveness is one of the critical questions for Europe. I do think we have made progress, but there's so much left. Even though we're a big multinational company, we're very localized. Where productions in 45 production sites in every country produce locally based on consumer needs and the customer demands and the logistics that we deal with in every country. So for us, the European market and the single market is critical. It needs to be strengthened. We truly believe in it. We need to see, can we get it to function even better? Can we find more harmonized ways to make it even stronger, the single market? As operating with 45 different sites, it's not easy to deal with a lot of different local requirements, which comes on top of the EU legislation. There are a lot of, for example, labelings. There are 15, I think we have 15 different labelings. Different DRS systems, they are great, but every country has some specialities that needs to be incorporated. So I think from a European perspective, the more we could work together to see how can we create even more harmonized single market, the more competitive we could become. Because in the end, it is about trying to build more strong companies, I believe, to make sure that we can deliver services and products consumers that they want in order to build Europe. And we can definitely play a part in that. And on that local aspect, I mean, it's also, I think, it's not just about one big Europe, but it's also to recognize the differences we have among our member states. Consumers are different, right? We have different preferences on tastes, on behaviors, the way we interact. I think we shouldn't neglect them. We are different, and that's great. So I think also, even though we might be seen as...
Could you give us some examples, for instance, in your work of differences among EU member states, if you have something that comes to your mind?
Look at tastes. Tastes. I don't know what's the Irish favorite flavor on taste, for example.
Coke Zero.
Zero. And then you could add some loves cherries, some loves more orange flavors, and that differs. And you can't tell this is the one everyone will love. It's impossible, right? You probably also love a different ice cream that you do. So I think it's being open to the differences we have, and then dealing with the local structure in each country. Because I think sometimes it ends up, also on the whole discussion of different pricing in different countries in one single market. We are different, right? Different countries have different cost structures, different DRS systems, different taxations, difference. And in that sense, there are differences, and I think they need to be recognized.
And how do you reconcile, therefore, the need for an harmonization to have a stronger company with this need for recognizing the difference?
Yeah, we need to respect the differences and obey to the laws in the different countries. If there are different labeling restrictions, of course, we need to adjust to them. There are different languages requirements on packaging, for example. Of course, we need them. But maybe there are ways to strengthen the single market, to make them even more harmonized, to make it easier for companies like us.
Thank you.
Frederick, I'd say to Sophie's point that we often talk about the differences between the member states, but Jimmy and I often focus on the differences within the member states as well. Especially with our larger countries, and even within our smaller countries, there are huge differences between, where Jimmy lives and where I live, capital city, rural area, the border counties, some of our larger neighbours where they're dealing with different borders in different countries, and then our periphery regions as well, who have to deal with a whole load of extra red tape and bureaucracy that we don't necessarily have to deal with. So
But taking this into consideration, and I'm moving back to you, Barry, it seems that it's really a headache to harmonize the single market because we do recognize all these differences. And I want to raise another issue, which is even more controversial, which is the Capital Markets Union, which is something that we have all agreed in the past years that we need if we want our companies to scale up and to be able to raise funding in Europe and not to have to cross the Atlantic. How do we do it? Why is it so hard to find a solution and to harmonize capital markets?
Well, look, we've a duty and a responsibility as members of the European Parliament, whom are elected by those that give us the privilege to be here, to create an atmosphere in which business thrives and to assist business to ensure it thrives through innovation, through quality and standards being reached, and education and opportunity. And thereafter to create synergies and as much commonality as one can while respecting the different competences that national governments have to retain. And if we do that successfully, there's ease of movement in relation to goods and services and people and opportunity, as I mentioned. And beyond that, then we have to work together in order to win trade in other blocks, as I mentioned earlier. Especially when we have issues around competitiveness, especially when we have issues around input costs. And if we address those, we then work together and united to win trade with other blocks of nations, whether it be the Mercosur countries, whether it be Australia, whether it be the Gulf states and so forth. And it's imperative that we move even beyond our existing union to win that trade, because the world has become much smaller, it's much more accessible, and there's much greater competition between other blocks and ourselves. And for us to remain to the forefront, we have to ensure that every opportunity and assistance is afforded to business, industry and commerce to thrive and to win business, win opportunities, and allow those that we represent ease of access, ease of opportunity, and then to benefit from the revenues that resource everything else that flows from that to make our lives easier and more enjoyable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's something that's going to be really at the core of the Irish presidency, especially for the negotiations of the
budget.
The budget, I was about to say.
But I mean, everything flows from budget, and while this presidency might be only 6 months, it will determine the pathway for the following 7 years, the multi-financial framework. And I mean, it's greatly challenged by virtue of the commitment that's made to defence and security, which is of paramount and significant importance, because when we talk about values and we talk about the illegal invasion of Ukraine, we talk about the war in the Middle East, we have to ensure, for example, that Putin is defeated, because we can't contemplate the consequences of that not being the case and the threat that would exist and that ensues in other Eastern Bloc countries. And I mentioned earlier, we have all benefited from the commitment of unity and the benefits of unity that I mentioned earlier. And it's equally as important that we're unified in our efforts to dispel Putin and that illegal invasion. And that's coming from a country that's military neutral, one of only 4, but one which recognises the need for us to ensure that that is the case. And that places great pressure on budget, places great pressure on the ability of the union to raise finances, and it has to look at new means and new methods to do so, which won't be easy and will be controversial. But leadership is about recognising that need and pursuing that need. I sit on an agriculture committee, as you mentioned earlier. We're faced with a 20% deficit before we even begin. So we're asking people to do more for less. But look, we have a responsibility to find ways of raising finances, altering, dealing with degressivity in relation to single farm payments that are made to the agricultural sector by virtue of addressing the capping system, and just creating means and methods to create more funding and then targeting that to ensure that your production systems food production systems that align with consumer sentiment on the basis of an increasing world population, but also align with environmental ambition and the commitments and the dedication that there is to that in order to ensure that there's quality of standards, food security is of paramount importance, and health and safety, and hopefully then build, when I go back to those international trade agreements, ensuring there's reciprocity in relation to those standards so as the world economy is more cognizant of its needs and requirements to climate change because of the impact that that is having. So look, it's not easy, as I said earlier. Nothing will be solved in 6 months, but we have a duty and a responsibility which is of paramount importance and very significant by virtue of agreeing a budget and allowing all 27 member states to do so, and maybe addressing the issue of own resources and find other ways and methods to raise finances, because there's an expectation on the part of those we represent that there's money trees across Europe. There isn't. And we have to face that reality and address that. And we have a huge duty and responsibility. I have no doubt that Ireland will lead out on that and ensure that its presidency sets the scene for the following 7 years.
Perfect. And I want to stay on the budget also with you, Jimmy, because we mentioned that the Irish presidency, as Barry said, is not going to conclude, well, they will conclude the negotiations. That's their ambition, and we hope so. And so it's going to be a really pivotal moment for nearly every sector. And in the current proposal, the Commission has presented the idea of national and regional partnership plans, which means that we are putting together the cohesion funding with agriculture, fisheries, migration, and other programs, everything under the same framework. So that means that the onus of the governance is shifted to the national level. That was obviously very controversial. I want to see from you, from the local level, how is this perceived, and whether you think this is going to negatively impact the capacity of the regions to integrate further to cohesion policies, or how do you look at it from a single market perspective?
And we would see it as being against everything that Europe should be about, the subsidiarity concept. So at regional level, we could deal with the cohesion funding. Nationally, we were dealing with common agricultural policy, and common agricultural policy is very important to my region. And we see this a weakening of the bottoms-up approach. If it's coming as one packet, we're now setting cohesion and CAP and the other programs, in conflict with each other. And certainly, we obviously what comes, and we have to deal with it, but it's not where we would wish things to be. At the Committee of the Regions, our meetings, we hear people talking very much, very passionately about cohesion funding, much less speaking about CAP. But CAP is hugely important in an Irish context. It may not be as important to some other regions. Like we still have a lot of people who, directly in farming, but the agri-food industry, huge numbers of people employed in those sectors. And we just can't have a situation where those jobs and those livelihoods become under threat. So what is being proposed and what looks like going to happen, to me and to a lot of people, is totally in conflict with what Europe should be about.
Mm-hmm. Emma, how, I'm picking your brain on the same issue, obviously, and also from a local perspective, what do you think, do you think that this is going to impact regions' capacities to decide what to do with their own funding and to what do you think is the best way to go now? Obviously, the proposal is already out, so we have to work on it. But from also remembering the time when you were Lord Mayor of Dublin, what was the importance of cohesion funding, for instance?
So, like Jimmy has said, we've done a lot of talking about this in the Committee of the Regions over the last while, and the opinion that I worked on earlier this year was on the Single Market and Customs Programme, which was one of I've lost count how many files there are, opinions on the MFF. But what I would say from our perspective there is that what we need from a regional and city perspective is to work together, but to also work really closely with our MEPs. And I would say that all the files that we've worked on, all of the messaging that we've worked on, our Irish representation in particular has been really supportive and very cognizant of the challenges that face our regions and local areas. Like Barry was a local politician at one time, weren't you, Barry? I think they all were, and many of our, that's where we come from, that's where we're rooted in. We all see the benefits at local level. To overcomplicate things, to say, like what Jimmy says, it's not what we want. What we want is, if I could speak to my own area, my own opinion, is to be able to, for example, on that Single Market and Customs Programme, to be able to bring part of the governance back to the regions. So we don't think that that can operate fully without, if you're transforming the customs programme. In Dublin, for example, we have a huge port. We've seen e-commerce and parcel packaging, Shein, Temu. We know all about the challenges that we're facing there. But on a real practical level, that means that our customs are dealing with that in Dublin Port, a vast amount of parcels, and our regions and our local authorities need to have a role to be able to make that function properly. I know I haven't exactly addressed the question that you've asked, but just to bring it back to that level, we need to, it's important that we have a role there.
Yeah, absolutely. And the measure you mentioned from the 1st of July, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
Parcel, yeah.
Today, €3.
And Sophie, I want to get back to you to the issue of, very quickly, because I see we don't have a lot of time left, but the issue of market fragmentation, because I feel that for you, for a business like Coca-Cola, is really the key issue. We underscore the different barriers that you mentioned, some of which simply cannot be avoided because that's how we are, and it's true we cannot deny the essence of the European Union. And at the same time, how do we overcome it in a way that makes companies more successful? I wanna still pick your brain on that.
Well, I think there are different ways. First, it starts with the dialogue.
And what you want also, if you can reply by mentioning some concrete, deliverables that you expect the Irish presidency to take into account over the next 6 months.
Yeah, I think it's connected to the title of this debate, right? It's about unlocking growth, making business more competitive. So I think what I'm hearing here is the importance of localness while still strengthening the single market. And there, from a company perspective, we can chip in. So I think it's first looking at the current EU legislation that it's uneven implemented across the country. So how can we ensure that it is more even, make it easier for the businesses across? And then to look at the possibility to reduce the fragmentation and to see how can we drive harmonization across the countries. It makes it easier for companies like us situated in different ones, where languages, for example, is one. Different kind of symbols on packaging. I think there are quite a lot of concrete examples we could look into to see how could we facilitate across Europe to make it easier for goods to move across the countries. Even though we have, I think, a lot of 15% of our volume is already moving across, but how can we facilitate even more? And what I do think to build on this growth is to recognize the power of Europe making more competitive, but also then recognizing the localness that you, Jimmy, was commenting on as well. there are jobs created in different countries, and we also contribute, I think, with industries that could contribute to the resilience of the different countries. And recognizing those differences and investing in local companies while trying to make it easier to operate across will help. It's not just one Europe, one consumer, one label, and one. But it's harmonizing as far as we can, but still then recognizing the local investments we are doing in the country. So it's, I believe it's the mix of seeing both sides, which I do believe that we have the territorial supply constraints that is focusing on one unified view, but I do think this localness perspectives are important to see in this one, to see how we can drive competitiveness. There is not just one way, there are more perspectives.
Perfect. Thanks a lot, Sophie. I want to see if the public has a question for our speakers. Otherwise, I'm going to ask something, a quick one to all of them. I don't see any hands, therefore let's continue. I have a question for each of you, which is, where do you think we should be in 6 months from now to say that we have really significantly advanced the single market agenda? Barry, we can start with you.
Well, like I said earlier, our major responsibility during the course of this 6 months will be to agree a budget that drives the agenda thereafter for the following 7 years. A multi-financial framework. I would hope it might broach the subject of means and methods by increasing own resources for the union. Whether that's around digital taxation, whether it's around corporation taxation.
Yeah, that's a tough one.
But we have to take the lead, and I've every faith and confidence in our own administration to be the honest broker that will drive that issue in order to bring it to a conclusion. And it'll come to the fore by virtue of that budget won't be sufficient. It never is. But that's notwithstanding, as I said earlier, our commitment to defence and security. But there has to be an acknowledgement of different components of that have to be realised as well. As I talk about, you can't have defence and security without a pro-rata commitment to food security. Therefore, we shouldn't be in a position to have a common agricultural policy that's 20% behind where it should be. And there has to be, we have to address that. And thereafter, if I'm selfish about what I want for this presidency, I want, having agreed a budget, have then agreed and be in a position to stand over what will be a commitment around a common agricultural policy that provides for generational renewal, that provides for a newer, younger, more vibrant population who are more committed to new innovation, new technologies, new farming practices, which, as I said earlier, respond to the need to align food production systems to consumer sentiment, to environmental commitments, and as a result that we move into producing food more intensively but more sustainably, and also recognise that regions that are less populated, less intensive, less arable, but equally as important by virtue of it having the availability of supplementary income for those families that answer to the needs across carbon trading, nature trading, biodiversity, nature restoration, monetising that in order to ensure people remain on the land, remain in the regions, and are not depopulated, and form the basis for future development across other areas that can offer newer opportunities to newer generations in those regions, but backboned by a commitment to the deficiencies we have in relation to energy security. And that was cruelly exposed because of the war. We have huge potential, but we have planning and permitting issues that are log jams presently to that sort of innovation. So we have to move to create atmosphere that identifies the common good and gets around the planning and permitting issues that are present.
Yeah. Emma, what's on your wish list?
Honestly, Barry summed it up beautifully, and I don't think he was selfish at all in saying all of those things, because although I come from a city, you know, we are from an island that is hugely reliant and hugely appreciative and admiring of our agricultural industry. I'm first generation Dubliner. My parents both come from farming backgrounds and generations before that, and our food security is imperative not only to our island but to Europe as a whole. So not to add anything else, but just to reiterate the role of cities and regions going forward in that budget. That's what I want to see, and thank you to Barry for summing it up beautifully.
Perfect. Sophie, what's your deliverable that you wish to see?
Wish list, no more rules and regulations. Let's work with the ones we have and make them simpler, more harmonized, to make sure that we can actually drive local productions in the different countries and create a competitive industry. Yeah.
Message landed. Jimmy,
and you know, I was just thinking there that when I came to Europe first, you had to have French francs in your wallet, you had to have Belgian francs, you had to have German marks, and I think there was a different currency in Luxembourg. So in a very small area, you needed at least 4 different currencies in your wallet. And look, we overcame that very simply. I think that too many people now feel that their food comes from the supermarket. And we're losing where our food actually comes from. So we obviously talk about security, and we're talking about national security. We're talking about food security. We need to speed up the whole area of renewable energy. You know, everybody is complaining now about the heat. Whether in Ireland we get rain maybe 300 days a year, but right now people are complaining about the heat, and certainly throughout many parts of Europe it's unbearable. So we have to address that, and the challenge there, you know, are we doing enough to get our renewables speeded up? We're not. Clearly, we're not.
Yeah.
So we have a lot of challenges there.
That's clearly, yeah. And sorry.
No, but in terms of identifying what challenges we can deal with in the short term and then more long term. So I think, despite the fact that we are saying and we're recognizing that we do need changes and changes around regulation in a lot of situations, and we need to streamline. From Sophie's point of view, we're never going to change the taste that people like in one country as against another, but clearly there's areas where we can improve on regulation, and we need to identify them by talking to people like Sophie. You know, we politicians, we recognise the problem, but it's only when you talk to industry that you get a real feeling for where the problems are.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for bringing up also the important topic of renewables and how that contributes to our competitiveness. We're a little bit late, but please join me in a round of applause for our fantastic panel. And now please remain seated, because there's going to be a super interesting panel from my colleague Peter Schaefer on simplifying your